EEB seminar. My name is Ashlyn Ford, and I will be your host. I am a third-year PhD student in Peggy Fong's lab. So a quick note, all your questions, please refer them to the end of the seminar. You can add them either in the Q&A box or raise your hand, and we will activate your microphone for you. And also, just to let you all know, Dr. Scott's Wi-Fi may potentially go out through some point in the seminar. So I would just say be patient and she will rejoin us in a few minutes. And other than that, I would like to introduce today's speaker. Her name is Dr. Cinda Scott, and she is a Center Director at the Tropical Island Biodiversity Studies, TIBS program at the School for Field Studies in Bocas del Toro, Panama. And her current research includes, but not limited to, community composition and abundance and diversity of zooplankton in Baja Almirante. And also understanding the utilization of mangroves, epibiont biodiversity and abundance as indicators of ecosystem health. And lastly, mangrove habitat complexity and ecosystem connectivity studies. And on top of research, she is also known as an educator and scientist who focuses on cultivating and providing international educational experiences for students seeking careers in marine biology, environmental sciences, and conservation. So she works with the Association of Marine Laboratories in the Caribbean, which is a leading network for students and instructors and investigators throughout the Caribbean to exchange research and resource management to advance marine and environmental education. And last, she also is a founding member of the WEEMS, which is the Black Women in Ecology and Evolution in Marine Science. And their initiative is aimed at supporting and promoting research and informing young scientists of opportunities. And with that, she today will be talking to us about the need for cultural competence in conservation. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Cinda Scott.
Thank you very much, Ashlyn, for that introduction. I hope everyone can hear me. And I'm going to launch my chat here. All right. Now. Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today to speak with you all. I am calling you from Panama. So in the event that I do disappear due to lack of electricity, I will call back in on my data. So I was going to call this talk Building Cultural Competence in Conservation, but I decided that it's actually needed. And there is a difference, and I'll get to that in a second. But this is a bit of a case study, if you will, of the Isla Bastimentos National Marine Park here in Bocas del Toro, Panama. So I want to preface this whole talk by saying, you will never know unless you try. And I say this because never in a million years did I think that I would be living in Panama on a very small island in a remote area. And never did I think that I would be able to combine all of my loves, which is research, education, administration, in one fantastic role. And I think it's really important to just let everybody know that you will never know unless you try, and you need to really put yourself out there to reap the benefits. So in 2014, I was living in New York City, and I was at New York City College of Technology, where I oversaw a National Science Foundation grant to improve STEM education and learning at the institution. In addition to inform that work, I was an adjunct professor in the biology department, where I taught for about 5 years. And while I was in New York, I just realized one day, sitting in my office, that I was not satisfied And I had done this whole PhD and all this stuff in the marine world, and I felt lost. And so I thought, what was the coolest job I've ever seen anyone have? And I thought back to my own study abroad experience in Costa Rica, and I decided that I wanted to try something like that. And so in 2014, in July, I packed up my entire tiny studio apartment and I moved to the island of Isla Colón, there on the bottom. And my life has changed for the better ever since. So this is our campus, and I work for the School for Field Studies, SFS. We are the Center for Tropical Island Biodiversity Studies on Isla Colón in Bocas. We also have other programs around the globe, including in Turks and Caicos, Costa Rica, Peru, Chile, Tanzania, Kenya, Bhutan, Cambodia, and Australia. So as Ashlyn stated in the introduction, I did my PhD in marine biology and fisheries at the University of Miami Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science. And my research focused on the genetic basis of evolved differences in Fundulus heteroclitus, particularly looking at metabolic genes and metabolic differences and between populations. And I completed my undergraduate degree from Middlebury College in environmental studies and conservation. My research focus now is mostly on mangrove ecosystems and mangrove complexity. I do still love genomics, but it's not so much my forte anymore. Also, when I was trained, we were using microarrays, which is now probably a thing of the past. And I really love being in the ocean. I love traveling, diving, music, and dancing, of course. So where are we? Here we are in Panama. The population of the whole country, which is about the size of South Carolina, is 4.1 million. And 13% of the population is indigenous. The gross domestic product is about 68 billion US dollars, and that is derived from the Panama Canal, banking and commerce, use of the ports, and tourism. Additionally, reggae en español was born in Panama because there was a heavy influence of Jamaican and Barbadian people coming to build the canal. And so reggae en español was born, which eventually turned into reggaeton. And that is the gift from Panama to the world. You are welcome. So there are 10 provinces and 3 indigenous comarcas in Panama with a coastline of about 2,490 kilometers. And up on the upper left side, I am all the way on the western side of the country in a small archipelago known as Bocas del Toro. The province is also known as Bocas del Toro, and the town is called Bocas Town. So there's a lot of Bocases. And this is just a map of the region. There are about 9 different islands in the archipelago. That smiley face is where I am located. And you can see that there is a large national marine park that cuts through the middle of Isla Bastimentos and extends into the marine habitats on either side of the island. Also, every province here has a baseball team and its own flag. So here you can see that. This is the view of the school, of our campus. You can see we have a lot of seagrass beds in front and that we are directly on the water. And this is another aerial view. And so what do we do? Well, we usually have cohorts of about 24 students that come from universities and colleges all around the United States. They come for a total of 103 days, and they spend the first 2 months of classes in the field and in lectures. And they take classes in tropical coastal ecology, principles of resource management, which is basically a terrestrial ecology course. They take a language, culture, and society of Panama course, which I somehow teach. And they take environmental policy and socioeconomic values. Then after those first 2 months, they perform what we call directed research, and it is directed because it's under the guidance of one of us faculty members. And they can choose a topic in either marine, terrestrial, or human and social dimensions. In addition, we require all of our students to participate in community engagement, and they are engaged in teams. They go into different projects around the community that are requested of us to implement change or to educate or to do some kind of environmental education-based program and teaching. So this is what it looks like. In the fields, we teach, and that is a class that is learning about echinoderms. On the upper right side, you have students and a professor there learning about the marine protected area from the manager of the park. On the bottom left side, one of our programs is dedicated to instructing young Nobe girls how to swim and stand up paddleboard and eventually get them out snorkeling, because in Nobe culture, it is more likely that young boys are taught to do that. And then on the right side, we do some teen programs and teen environmental work in the field. So Bocas, I love the upper right photo because it really represents the kinds of people that you will see here. These are the children of Bocas, and this is on Dia de Etnia Negra, which is a Black Culture Day in May. And it doesn't matter here what your background is, you will find everyone dressed in what they perceive to be Afrocentric garb, which is beautiful to see on the islands. And so Isla Colón has about 8,500 people, yet it sees 225,000 tourists per year. And it is considered the poorest province in the nation. It is made up of a mixture of Afro-Antillanos, indigenous peoples, Chinese Panamanians, Panamanian mestizos, and immigrants from the US, Europe, South America. We all live here in Bocas del Toro. The life expectancy for Panamanians is on average 79. However, if you are indigenous Panamanian, that falls to about 68. The indigenous population in Bocas is about 80,000, and about half the population is 15 years or younger. Panama is a middle income country. It has the second worst income distribution in Latin America, where the top 20% of earners control 50% of the economy. And so this has consequences, of course, for access to education. And on the bottom right, you can see a photo of myself sitting next to Professor Carolyn Kovacs and two professors from the University of Panama and Changuinola, where we try to give talks and charlas to the university students that are in a very rural area near Chiquita Banana. So what is the culture like? Well, it's a very collectivistic society. You have very tight-knit family units and certainly small town vibes where everyone knows everyone. Cultural traditions are generally passed down orally. It's home to the largest indigenous group in Panama, the Nobe Bugle. And the languages spoken on the island are Spanish, Guariwari, which is like a Jamaican patois, mixed with Spanish and Nobere words. Then you have Navere and you have English. And I put all of this here because in most science talks, this is never talked about or discussed. You go somewhere, you do your research and you present on the research, but what I'm trying to do is to build an understanding of how important it is to have cultural competence in the process of science and conservation in order to be sensitive to the values and traditions in a manner that includes people rather than excludes them. So this is the Hofstede Index, and I put this here because the United States is the most highly rated individualistic society in the world with a value of 91. And Panama is one of the more collectivistic societies rated at a value of 11. So why is this important? Well, when we start talking about, okay, we want to expand the National Marine Park here. Well, that might be extremely difficult to do if, for example, you look at number 5, group identity. In an individualistic society, you have the right to privacy, whereas in a collectivistic society, there's a stress on belonging. And in addition, if you look at, for example, number 7, opinions. In an individualistic society, your opinion is expected. It's a one person, one vote society. Whereas in a collectivistic society, your opinions and votes are predetermined by the in-group. So imagine trying to work with a society and you come from an individualistic perspective, trying to work in a collectivistic world, how this could cause conflict and how if you don't understand this, that conflict can be perpetuated for years. So I recently talked about this in a TEDx talk that I recorded here in Panama. And the crux of it is that I believe that conservation should be rooted in equity. And this talk is now on the TED site. So if you go to TED.com and type in my name, you'll be able to watch it. It's about 16 minutes long. But I will talk about some of the things that are in that video here today. So what is cultural competence? Well, it's having a deep understanding of other cultures, right? We have our own worldview, our own culture, and our own values. And a lot of times I get students that come on program and I ask them to identify their own culture. And they say, well, we're from the US, we don't really have a culture. And I say, oh, really? And it takes them a couple of minutes to figure out how they would define their culture as a person from the US. Whereas other people around the world know what the US culture is. You know, everything is very quick, the customer's always right. We have to have everything, right? And so it's important to understand the worldview of others, to understand other cultures and other values, and how your individualistic or individualism intersects with other cultures and value systems. Because conservation requires people. It requires all people. This photo I love because this was during one of our students' presentations. And what you can see here is a mixture of all different actors in the Bocas area. The woman in pink on the left side, she is the president of the Women's Cooperative on Isla Colón. The gentleman in the front in the blue, he is in charge of Cero Basura. The woman next to him in tan is the director of the Sea Turtle Conservancy. The police officer is from the tourism police. Agustin in the front, he is a fisherman. So in order to have success, you have to have everyone and all of the voices available and seated at the table. I truly believe that. Conservation indeed requires cultural competence. And so one of the questions we pose to our students is paradise a paradise for everyone? And this is a picture from the Isla Bastimentos National Marine Park. Well, when you get to Bocas, these are some of the things you might see, except in the middle for the resplendent quetzal, which I took that photo in Boquete in the Highlands. So all my bird nerds, it was amazing. But when you come to Bocas, you will also see coral reefs, you know, down on the left side, that is a beautiful colony of Acropora palmata. You can go into the mangroves, you can go to all the different islands, right? And it is beautiful, but Bocas has a secret. Bocas has serious problems with regard to infrastructure, waste management, electricity. So the other side of this is that, you know, paradise isn't necessarily a paradise for everyone. Depends on who you are. So again, here's the picture of the Acropora palmata, and on the right-hand side, we also deal with a lot of disease and bleaching. This is not the same exact colony. It's in the same region, but it's 2 years apart. And sadly, the other day I went diving on November 7th, the water temperature was 29, and we are in the midst of a massive coral bleaching event here in Bocas. I wrote to my colleagues in Miami, and they said that they hadn't seen such widespread bleaching in Florida yet, but it's happening in the Caribbean in various different locations. So what are some of the challenges to marine ecosystems here in Bocas? And what are the contributing factors? Well, a 2014 paper by Seaman et al. From Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute found that chlorophyll A levels near town are twice as high, and we have a lot of eutrophication and turbidity. We're losing 3D structured corals and moving to more parietes, you know, 2D structured corals, such as what you see on the upper right corner in the photo. We have a lot of development due to tourism and people removing mangroves in order to make docks and build their homes, overfishing and destructive fishing practices. We've got hypoxic events, coral bleaching, heavy in 2010 and 15, and now we had once 2017 and now 2020. And it's happening more and more, right, as we see the impacts of climate change. We have loss of fish diversity, including loss of top predators, and as I've mentioned, deforestation of mangroves. So what are the causes? Well, about an hour from here is massive monoculture of bananas, Chiquita banana. They, obviously every time it rains, and it rains here a lot, we're in the rainforest, we receive all of that sediment into the bay. We also are dealing with climate change, overfishing. We have mismanagement of waste, issues in governance, right? Putting value on the environment over tourism. That is a major problem. We have the issue of tourism, and in addition, cultural practices. So we still have turtle poaching and egg harvesting and shark finning, but a lot of this is also tied to the culture that is here. We also are dealing with issues like Filthy Friday on the right. This is my worst nightmare. Luckily, my students never are able to participate because they always have a lab on Friday afternoons. So this is a massive party crawl, and they no longer throw glitter in the water, which is great. And they claim to be eco-friendly and use reusable cups. But as you can see, it's really close to the mangroves, and there is a coral reef right there. The photo on the left is after I screamed at the 3 gentlemen in the water who were standing on corals taking selfies. So education, particularly tourist education, is critical. We have launched a campaign along with the municipal government to stop people from removing starfish out of the water, as you see on the left, and introducing signs on the beach that are educational and inform tourists the proper etiquette for interacting with starfish, such as on the upper right. Okay, other issues, right? Here we are, this is Panama, and we are located where that purple circle is, and this is an ecosystem vulnerability to climate change map, and we're in trouble. Panama has a climate change action plan, but for this region, there is no plan. But what you can see is that we are highly susceptible to sea level rise in this area. In addition, this is Dr. Noel Lucy's work from STRI Panama. You can see the blue star in the inner bay and the yellow star in the outer bay. That in the inner bay, where it's closer to one of the major towns, Almirante, we're experiencing hypoxic, if not anoxic events on a regular yearly basis. But what she's also found is that, whoops, I wonder why. Sorry, I can't advance for some reason. That is strange. Hold on just a moment. Okay, something just went awry. Okay. Oh no. Hi, Ashlyn, I'm sorry.
I guess go back and forth.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I'm going to stop the share if I can, but it's very odd. I haven't had this happen before. Okay. Oh, it was a beautiful graph I was about to show you. Okay. Apparently my PowerPoint is not wanting to function right now. I'm so sorry.
Sometimes, computers.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go back to screen share. Of course, now I have to open the program again. Just a moment. How bizarre. Okay. Okay, here we are. And I apologize for that. So I believe I was right around here. Okay, now I don't know what's going on. Oh. Can you see my screen, Ashlyn?
Yes, I can see it.
You just see it's black?
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Yep. Okay, we're back.
Okay. Well, let's see what happens, right? So I apologize. But so Dr. Lucy has also found that throughout the year, we're having mini hypoxic events, and it's particularly impacting in the 6-meter range below the surface. And that is affecting corals. They're dying, and obviously they can't move to get oxygen. So this is extremely problematic as well. So what does this mean for Bocas? And is this the new normal? We hope that it's not, but we do know that we are shifting away from 3D structured reefs to more 2D that look like this, which we're already seeing happening in Bocas. And so we need to look at a multiple of factors here: global climate change, local threats, and the natural systems that are causing these. So I apologize for the question mark. I couldn't find a better question mark, but so the question is the Isla Bastimentos National Marine Park, or the Parque Nacional Marino Isla Bastimentos, is it effective, right? And how did this come to be? And the park was actually created in 1988, and it is about 13,360 hectares. The dotted black lines show the outline of the park, and the different colors just represent the different kinds of ecosystems. So that olive green color is mangroves, and the pink and the coral color are coral reefs. And you also have seagrass beds throughout there as well. And sorry, the olive color is actually the seagrass beds, and the bright kind of fluorescent green dotting that is mangrove islands. So the goals of the Parque Nacional Marino are to conserve a representative sample of the marine and coastal ecosystems of the region, with special attention to those supporting marine turtles. That was the original main goal. However, in 2016, the goal was rewritten, and actually it was rewritten and finally included at the end there. It says, with the help of communities and local actors. So 20 odd years later is when we get communities and local actors included in the process. And as of 2005, 52 of 71 Caribbean coral species were identified within the park, as well as over 250 fish and mammal species. And additionally, it's important to note that 84% of visitors are non-Panamanian, with over 80,000 registered visitors to the park in 2015. And so I apologize for the blurriness of this, because when I blew it up, it didn't work out as well as I wanted, but you can see the park outline. But the reason why the park looks as odd-shaped as it does is because there are communities that were already present before the design of the park. And so for this reason, it has this odd, very odd shape. Some of the major issues that have popped up since the beginning of the park are that the local community was not included or consulted in the original design. So that led to very little community buy-in, because there were sudden limitations to where you could fish and what you could do. I would say that there was a low level of cultural competence during the creation of the park. And also, it's very unclear who's actually benefiting. Is it the tour operators, the fishermen? Is it the tourists? How about the marine life that it's supposed to actually benefit as well? And obviously, Senor Polo, he's a gentleman that lives out that way. And so I really actually think that with conservation, we have to step back and consider decolonizing conservation. Because normally the way this works is it's usually centralized, top-heavy, government mandated, we're gonna create this park and this is what's gonna happen, right? And that cancels out local and indigenous people who are often blamed for these environmental problems, which is not true. and it excludes indigenous voices. It can pit local authorities against local indigenous people. So the sea turtle egg consumption, for example, that is a big issue here. It denies people the right to practice cultural rituals, and it denies people the right to their land. And so I really think that even still, we have modern models of conservation that have neo-colonial frameworks that are entrenched in racist ideals that were purposely designed to remove people from natural spaces in order to, quote unquote, protect the wild. You look at Serengeti, you look at Yellowstone, and this is what happened. We've had forcible, violent removal of people in order to protect the wild. And so we really need to think more clearly when we talk about conservation and doing marine protected areas, for example, as to who is truly benefiting. Because if you have 83% of the people visiting the Isla Bastimentos National Marine Park that are foreign, that should send a pretty clear message as to who might be benefiting the most. And another question is, are MPAs effective? And if they are, how do we know, right? So there are 15,000 MPAs throughout the world, which only represents about 7.5% of the world's oceans. And in 2016, the IUCN called for the protection of 30% of the world's oceans in 2030 or by 2030. And more recent work has shown that effective MPAs are those with the strongest protections. So specifically, no take. And we know this to be true, but how can we implement more effective MPAs that are no take given the socio and economic environments, right? So I just made this last night actually, and I thought, okay, what are the wants of conservation? One, we want to increase biomass, we want to increase in species richness and diversity, and we want to limit the use of the space, right? We don't want people to take things from it, and we want it to be free of humans generally. And on the social side of it, in the social science side, we want community engaged to be, we want the community to be engaged in the product. We want improved economic benefits, clear communication between all actors, and we want a reduction of inequity and power imbalance. So on the science side, we know that for MPAs to be effective, they have to possess at least 4 of the 5 neoli, or characteristics. So they should be no take, they should be enforced, old, large, and isolated. And this paper in 2014 that came out in Nature was the first to study MPAs that used a more integrated approach across 40 different countries in 87 different MPAs. But the results were kind of depressing, right? We found that there was an overall poor performance. Out of 87 MPAs, only 4 possessed all 5 neoli, and only 5 possessed 4 neoli. So overall poor performance. There were no significant differences between fish sites and MPAs with only 1 or 2 neoli features. And though there was species richness of large fishes, 36% greater inside the MPAs than the fished areas, it seems that MPAs with isolation features is the most important, and that there weren't really more positive results, which is quite sad. On the social side of it, and this paper is in press by Almudena Canovas Molina, I think it's a wonderful paper that shows some of the social conflict manifestations that are coming out of the presence of marine protected areas around the world. And so they went through the literature and they grouped papers based on keywords, MPAs, conflict, and I can't remember the other one, but these were the 16 most important social conflict manifestations. And I circled those that we see here in Bocas. Feelings of exclusion, inequities in the distribution of MPA benefits. There's a lack of trust, right? Food insecurity. You have illegal fishing, conflicts between fishers and conservationists. Conflicts between fishers and tourism is a big one. You have tourism pressure, interinstitutional conflicts. So we have to handle both the social side and the science side to figure out how we can remedy or help fix this current situation that's happening here in this park. So is the PNMIB well designed, and how do we know? Well, I can definitely tell you that this park fails to meet, the park in Bocas fails to meet the requirements for an effective MPA. Lack of enforcement, it's not large, it's not isolated, and people are permitted to catch fish, right? And it allows people, I realize that's in Spanish, sometimes I give talks in Spanish, so this is, people can fish with rod and line, and they are not to extract reproducing adults. So let's just quickly change focus for a second to talk about mangroves, as the marine park has a lot of mangroves. We have hundreds of mangrove islands here in Bocas. The Caribbean coast of Panama only comprises 3.5% of all mangroves in Panama as a whole. And that represents 50% of mangroves on the Caribbean coast are located actually in Bocas. And the approximate back of the envelope calculation for the sequestration of carbon rate is about 348 metric tons per year. Mangroves, as we all know, are a foundation species. I love them because they have like a fun terrestrial party on the top, and they've got a really sweet marine ecosystem on the bottom. I think they're just fascinating. And they also are a critical habitat for fish and invertebrates. And so when we look at the park, you can see the pink arrows I've drawn show where you have seagrass and mangroves surrounding the islands that are not included in the marine park. And yeah, again, how do we know if we're actually protecting the most complex and most important habitats? Because just because you have the mangroves in this park doesn't mean that you're actually capturing the complexity that's needed to support these various different habitats. And so you can see the mangroves that are within the park in the red almost are about the same amount as are outside of the park. And so the work that I've been doing is looking at habitat complexity of mangrove island seascapes. We know that complexity of fish and fish species diversity and abundance increases the closer you are to mangroves. And we also know that when you have mangrove seagrasses and coral reef habitats in close proximity, that it definitely provides better resistance to disturbances. And it also provides a greater diversity of fishes. So why measure mangrove habitat complexity? Well, it's important for marine park management in order to consider the entire complexity of a seascape and to determine if the boundaries actually include the most complex habitat, which in turn impacts connectivity between systems, right? So we also want to make sure that you are able to decrease massive oscillations in the environment and decreasing the amount or the likelihood of catastrophic shifts. So for this reason, we want to be able to conserve and protect complex ecosystems. So connectivity, there are three different parts. You have structural, potential, and actual. And the actual connectivity is actually well defined in seascapes, and it's looking at the movements of organisms between different habitats, whereas the structural and potential connectivity are looking more at the physical attributes like the size and the shape of a habitat, and in the potential connectivity, understanding the likelihood of organisms moving from one habitat to another. So in marine ecosystems, there does remain a lack of information to define structural and potential connectivity, which is important when we talk about complexity. So this is half of my research group. They are undergraduates, but I can tell you they are working at a early entry graduate level when they're out in the field with me. And we have high expectations, and if it's not fun, why do it? So we also have a lot of fun out there. Their hypotheses for this study were that one, habitat complexity increases further away from anthropogenic influences, and secondly, that habitat complexity increases when in close proximity to mangroves. So you can see the airport sign there, Bocas del Toro. That is where about probably 6,000 people live. People are also dotted throughout the islands, and these were the 3 areas of the study. We wanted to investigate how habitat complexity shifts across mangrove island seascapes. So we looked at mangroves mangrove habitat complexity close to anthropogenic sources near where that airport sign is. We looked at mangroves in the park, and then of course, farthest away and outside of the park. And so we used Haas scores. This was published in 2005 by Gratwick and Spate, and we modified it for our study to look at and to calculate an overall total Haas score based off of the following characteristics: rugosity, variety of growth forms, height. We looked at refuge size categories. We looked at live cover, so the percent of living corals, mangrove roots, seagrasses, macroalgae, and sponges, and of course looking at hard substratum, the percentage of hard substrates. And let's see, right, so it's important here to understand that rugosity, height, and refuge size account for structural connectivity in this assessment, whereas variety of growth, live cover, and hard substratum are elements of potential connectivity. And so these were the study sites. You have zone 1, there were 5 locations. In zone 2, there were 5 locations, and in zone 3. So Tony and Max here are carrying out a gigantic quadrat that they built and wanted to develop themselves. So I gave them the license to do that. So the habitat complexity was evaluated for each quadrat through a visual survey. They used 15-meter transects that were randomly placed perpendicular to the edge to lay 2 by 5, the large quadrat. And it was placed at 1, 6, and 11 meters on the transects, so coming out from the mangroves. And then it was divided into 9 equal sections to better assess the substrate data in each quadrat. And they did 3 replicates per site. The photos, they were also using photos in CoralNet to do live and hard coral cover percentages. And then for rugosity, they took photos from the side. In addition, they looked at the highest and lowest heights. They looked at species richness by doing a visual survey around the mangrove island. They assigned a habitat assessment score to each quadrat to look for shifts within the various different microhabitats. And let's see, yes, they used all the criteria to assess or to create the score. However, some of the parameters were changed a little with regard to size because our data didn't fit the original sizes. And I sometimes wonder, 2005, that was 15 years ago. And I wonder if the community structure has changed so much since then that we're not able to use the same methods. So rain or shine, we go out, we have fun, we rock it. The students have a lot of fun, I have a lot of fun, and I just love being out in the mangroves. And my dog, Professor Webster, loves it as well. So the results, that pink, I usually put this in a table, but for some reason I was being very, I don't know. So this pink is comparing the close to the MPA, right? And then the blue is the MPA to the far site, and the green is the close to town to the far site. And what we know from our work is that we have found significant differences between the near anthropogenic site to the far outside site and the marine park versus the far outside site. In addition, we looked at a comparison between the 1 and 11 meter mark and found that the only difference in the characteristics was in the height. not in the total Haas score. So we also found that, sorry, I have to move my thing here, where the live cover and hard substratum were significantly different between the MPA and sites far away from anthropogenic impacts. Mangrove islands that were near anthropogenic impacts were significantly different in habitat complexity from mangrove islands far away from anthropogenic impacts. There was a significant difference in the overall habitat complexity between the MPA and far away. And the variety of growth was significantly different between sites that were near anthropogenic impacts and sites that were far away. So live cover and hard substratum and variety of growth all represent potential connectivity. Additionally, we did many other tests, but I didn't show all of them here. I'm just going to show you the results. That habitat complexity variables accounted for 66% of the variation in observed species richness by multiple linear regression, and that the Haas category that had the highest correlation with species richness was actually variety of growth, and the lowest was species richness was live cover and hard substratum. We also did a PCA analysis, and we found that there was no structure between islands in relation to the Haas criteria, and therefore there was only one cluster for all sites within a 95% threshold. So conclusions from this, if we look at the zones, zone 3 is really more complex than the other two zones together, and that there were no significant differences in habitat assessment scores between zone 1 and zone 2, which, you know, one of those is a marine protected area, right? So in conclusion, there was no trend of higher complexity moving from, from town, but there was more complex islands in the zone 3, right? Supporting our initial hypothesis that complexity is higher in areas further away from anthropogenic sources or Isla Colón. There's greater structural and potential connectivity in that far away zone in zone 3. And that habitat complexity was really not significantly different between the MPA and the mangrove islands closer to Bocas Town, suggesting that the park does not include mangrove habitats with high complexity, which is problematic overall, and has serious management consequences for the park. And so it's not included in the marine protected area, and therefore, you know, you can fish, you can do touristic activities there without any consequence. So this data, I think, is really important because it supports other findings that more complex marine habitats contain a greater variety of fish. In that, hang on a second, I'm sorry, I read the wrong line. So the marine protected area is not more complex, okay? And that the variety of growth forms was most important with regard to species richness in this study. And I think that also with species richness, it was found to be most correlated with the variety of growth, which is likely due to the variety of growth forms increasing in microhabitats, which is why they did so many different transects. Okay, so if the most complex habitats exist outside of the protected area, why not expand the limits of the park? I'm sure you're all asking this question. But the other questions that you need to also ask are, what is the societal cost? What is the ecosystem cost? What harms could expansion cause? Who will benefit the most or the least? And who will monitor and protect? Right now they have 8 park guards, and they work on a 4 and 4 rotation every 2 weeks for 13,000 hectares. And also, what will it look like? And will it be more effective? So one of the solutions that was recently created in 2019, also by Dr. Anna Spalding at University of Oregon and Jane Lubchenco, is this MPA guide, where it provides a framework and it also standardizes the language surrounding MPAs because it's so different and so varied around the world. So it has 4 steps for MPA establishment. You're committed to it, you're designated, you're implemented, and you're actively managed. And then you have a level of protection, which is minimally, lightly, highly, or fully. if we look at the Isla Bastimentos National Marine Park, I would originally kind of categorize it here. It is implemented. Yes, it has an active management plan, but when I look at it again, unfortunately, we almost have to push it back to the designated stage of establishment because it just is not able to be enforced in the manner in which it needs. And it doesn't meet some of the very critical criteria, and it's not fully protected. It's not highly protected. It's not even lightly protected. So this is where we are with our MPA. So there's a lot of talk recently about how we need big MPAs so that we can have connectivity for some of the larger top predators. But in thinking about this and thinking about expansions, we also need big plans to include people rather than excluding them. Because, I mean, we have been seriously dating, right? Nature and people for like 350,000 years. We come as a package. We are not different. And we need to stop supporting conservation models that completely exclude people from the puzzle. And so in thinking about solutions, we have to know where we stand, right? We have to do assessments. We have to determine the level of efficacy. And we need, secondly, to include indigenous knowledge and understand culturally important practices by assessing all cultural, social, and economic practices. We have to employ active cultural competence in order to achieve success. We also need serious science to support changes. In countries like Panama, where there is a lot of activity in the Ministry of the Environment, unfortunately, the money that should come to some of the regions that are farther out, like in Bocas, just does not arrive. And it's not necessarily a priority. It doesn't mean that the government doesn't want to do it, but it does mean that there needs to be a serious restructuring of how that money gets to the right places and the right people. And speaking of money, sustainable financing is absolutely critical to the mission of protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030. We will not be able to achieve this without sustainable financing. And I think the example in the Seychelles of the debt for conservation swap is really quite interesting. And if you're interested, there is a TED Talk on that. So what happens when people are not included? I hope you will be able to see this. Let's see. I hope you can see this, but this was 1 year ago in Bocas when all of the boat drivers decided to strike, and they shut off all access between islands, and it was a mess. It was 4 days. This is what happens in Bocas when you don't include local people and local voices in decision making. And I recently, okay, now how do I get out of here? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. So I recently went up to Panama City and spoke with the policy director for protected areas in Bocas, and she was very excited about expanding the marine park, but I have great pause. I'm hopeful, right? And so I helped to establish Bocas as a hope spot as part of the Mission Blue Hope Spot initiative, along with Caribbean Coral Restoration, the Sea Turtle Conservancy, Mar Alliance, the Tourism Authority, Ministry of the Environment, Cacao Blessings, and Kauai Tours. And really, this is a public-private partnership that I think is really important and involves local government authorities. So I'm hopeful, but I also want to make sure that in this process that all voices are accounted for and that we move forward in a way that is inclusive. And so I really think it's important to get out there and to educate and share knowledge. And so we do just that. We go and we work with the park guards and we work with kids and we hold meetings and we try to get everybody up to speed and on board. And so it took me about an hour to do this because I kept thinking, well, is it societal norms that inform natural systems that then, so really it's natural systems that I think inform our societal norms that then have anthropogenic impacts that then dictate our policies. And, you know, we can think about this because it's not linear, right? And it all is circular. And so I really do believe that conservation has to be rooted in equity, and that with more diverse ideas, we will have solutions that reflect and also respect cultural differences. And so I wrote an article in Waterlust, and I think this is how I was contacted. I can't remember, but it was called Changing the Narrative in Conservation and Marine Science is the Responsibility of Us All. And I truly believe that. And so I wanted to include this because I think it's vitally important. How can you support BIPOC students whose voices sometimes are not heard and are not included? And I think it's important that you believe in them and show that you believe in them. I call this getting in the pool. You have to support them with your presence. You have to show up and encourage them to keep trying. I think it's important to diversify the narrative, stop using material or curriculum that's comfortable only for you, and to explore other narratives and change the story and practice cultural competence. Being an ally is an active fight. It's not passive. You have to understand what your own implicit biases are coming from a highly individualistic society, right? It could be on any scale. Educating yourself is really, really important. Doing the reading, putting in the effort, right? There's this attitude in science and conservation that we don't have to worry about racial stuff. That doesn't matter. But it absolutely does, because we're not immune to the legacies of slavery or Jim Crow. We're not immune to the consequences around the globe of some of the conservation efforts and the consequences that are coming out of that. And obviously, I'm always a proponent of changing spending habits and not supporting companies that oppress people. And ending racist policies, right? Using your vote and your dollars to voice and to end decades-old racist policies in healthcare, education, environmental issues, criminal justice system, and the economy in general. And so my goal now in life is to build more equity in ocean science, and I think it's extremely needed. And my website's being redone, but it is syntheses.world. And the answer that I'm going to give to graduate students in a little bit is yes, you can change career paths. That's me as a graduate student hacking up some fish in Sapelo Island, trying to take out brains and livers and hearts to extract DNA and RNA. And finally, please reduce, reuse, and recycle. Try to be a vegetarian or a vegan for a few days or forever, and know where your stuff comes from. And with that, I thank you. And if you have questions, or if you'd like to find out more about Black women in ecology, evolution, and marine science, BWEAMS, you can email me, and it's been a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you again for joining us. That was a really interesting seminar. I enjoyed the topics that you showed us today. So I guess very quickly, if anyone has questions, they can raise their hands and we can unmute you, and or I can just start asking questions from the Q&A.
I see someone is asking, how are things working for the field station during the pandemic? So we have not had students since March. We had to evacuate our student group, unfortunately. And that's been really hard on all of us here. I'm the only person at the field station. And we have some people that come in and out, like our site manager, our community coordinator, and our program assistant, but we don't plan on having students until June of 2021. So in the meantime, I am trying to go to Panama City to go and pick up our new 3-year research permit. In the past, they were only 1 year. So it's very exciting that they gave us a 3-year extension. And hopefully I can get in the water and start doing more complexity research. That would be nice.
I think Rachel also had another question.
let's see. Conservation practices can be really antagonistic to local practices, and I imagine it can be super hard to address and maybe take years. Do you have any examples from your experience of what has worked or at least is going in that direction? Yes, you are correct. You know, there is a distrust between local community members and people who are in conservation. Imagine you have all of these different entities that come into Bocas with well-meaning intentions. You know, you've had Engineers Without Borders and all these different groups coming in, and they descend upon an indigenous community and put on them what they think they need. And the people that we work with are like, yeah, we didn't ask for them to come. We don't know why they're coming. And so there's this attitude and a mentality that, oh, we're going to help the people, but no, they don't want it. And you should have asked before you entered into their community. And so there is a lot of distrust. And so we have done a lot of work in rebuilding trust and sitting down, as I showed in the photograph in the beginning, and actually having the conversations that are very difficult and very needed. And there's a lot of distrust between local community members and the government. And so when you can have a safe space where you can invite government officials and you can invite local people to join together and have a conversation, that's pretty powerful. And we provide a sort of neutral space where we can do that because our focus is more on education and research.
Any other questions?
We have another one in the Q&A.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dwindling, yeah. Yeah, so what are the local attitudes and concerns about dwindling biodiversity, particularly when it is caused by tourism? Right, so, ooh, that's complicated. I would say here, people are aware that there is a deep erosion of biodiversity. And they also feel that the benefits of tourism are not necessarily directly impacting them positively. A lot of businesses here are foreign owned. And so when you go out and spend money, you're putting money back in the pocket of foreigners. And so that has caused a rift in the community where you have wealthy foreigners, and then you have not as wealthy local people. But there are organizations that are addressing this. We have Unidos por Bocas, which is a organization that has brought local leaders together with concerned foreigners and I've been to several of those meetings, and we were successful in building trash cans and creating a partnership with the municipal government to remove waste from those established trash cans. So it is on the ground work, and it is every day, and it is understanding the people and the culture in which you are working. That is the way forward. Too many people come here not having any idea who the people are, and they just think they're going to do whatever they want, and that has to end. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Concerns? If not, thank you again for joining us. And yes, thanks everyone for coming to the seminar as well. And hopefully we'll see you again in upcoming weeks for the next, not host, but seminar. Yeah, have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.